On the morning of my 18th birthday, I didn't find balloons or cake waiting for me. I found a black trash bag, stuffed with my clothes, dropped at my feet like I was yesterday's garbage. My adoptive mother, Carolyn, held it out with the same hands that had packed my school lunches for years. Only this time her fingers trembled, not with care, but with calculation. The room was silent, except for the creak of Frank's chair and the muffled gasp of Mrs. Ruth, our 70-year-old neighbor, who had come by to wish me well. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about family collapsed. Before I go further, I want to pause and invite you, yes, you watching this right now, to join me. If this opening already stirs something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Tell me down below. I read every single reply. And if stories like this speak to your heart, I'd be honored if you subscribed. Together, we can build a community that believes in truth healing and second chances. My name is Daniel Harris, and until that day, I believed I was just another quiet kid in a quiet Texas town. I fixed engines with Frank, did my homework at the kitchen table, mowed lawns to save for college. Nothing extraordinary. But on that birthday, the ordinary turned brutal. Carolyn's voice sliced through the silence. Daniel, we only adopted you for the state checks. 18 years, $1,500 a month. That money stops today. So do we. She didn't look at me with the softness of a mother. She looked at me like an investment that had finally expired. Frank has always kept his eyes down, pretending to be absorbed in the grain of the table he'd sanded years ago. I stood frozen, the garbage bag heavy in my hands, though it barely held anything, just a few shirts, a toothbrush, a second-hand pair of sneakers. My life reduced to what could fit in a sack you'd carry to the curb. Across the room, Mrs. Ruth pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a prayer I couldn't hear. I wanted to shout, to demand answers. Instead, what came out was a whisper. On my birthday, Carolyn didn't flinch. You were never really ours. We fulfilled our obligation. Now the room is available for rent. Someone already called. Frank mumbled something about giving me a few days, but Carolyn shut him down with a look sharp enough to cut glass. I remember staring at that kitchen walls, lined with beige paint, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air, the old clock ticking steadily above us, as if I were suddenly a guest in a stranger's home. For 18 years, I had called these two people Mom and Dad. Now I realized I had been nothing more than a monthly deposit, a line item on a spreadsheet. And in that moment, with neighbors watching, with the summer heat pressing in through the open window, I felt the truth settle heavy in my chest. I wasn't being celebrated. I was being erased. I carried that trash bag out of the kitchen, but the weight that pressed hardest on me wasn't the fabric and clothes. It was the memory of all the years that had led to this single moment. Standing there on the porch, with the summer air humming with cicadas, and Mrs. Ruth still shaking her head in disbelief, I realized my life had never been about love. It had always been about numbers. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Carolyn kept a ledger book on the top shelf of the pantry, tucked between canned peaches and a box of saltine crackers. I used to think it was for groceries, but when I was 14, I caught a glimpse of the pages my name scrawled at the top rows of entries with exact dollar amounts. Food allowance, clothing stipend, utilities adjustment. It was a budget, and I was the expense. Meals were measured too. Sunday roasts stretched into Tuesday casseroles, Wednesday soups, and by Thursday, the last spoonful tasted more like calculation than nourishment. Carolyn would remark, efficiency is love made visible, as though portion control could replace tenderness. There were never birthday cakes with my name written in frosting, never Christmas gifts wrapped with care. The closest I got was a graphing calculator handed over with the receipt clipped to the box, as if the proof of purchase mattered more than the gesture itself. Frank was different, but only slightly. He wasn't cruel. He was quiet. He taught me how to change oil in the driveway, how to patch drywall, how to rotate tires on the old Ford pickup. He'd hand me a wrench with a kind of distracted patience, muttering, "A man should know how to fix things." And for a moment I let myself believe that was fatherhood. But even in those rare hours under the hood of a car, I could feel the distance. He never called me son unless the social worker was scheduled to visit. He never once threw a baseball with me, even though he bought a glove when school required it. The lessons he gave me felt less like bonding and more like keeping me occupied, like I was a chore to be managed. I used to wonder why Carolyn flinched whenever I asked about my biological parents. One evening at dinner, when I was 13, I asked why I didn't look like anyone in the family photos hanging in the hallway. Her fork froze mid-air, her gray eyes narrowing. "We stepped up when others wouldn't." "That's all you need to know," she said. Frank cleared his throat, added softly, "Best not to dig into the past, Daniel." Then the subject was sealed away like a locked filing cabinet out of reach, guarded by silence. Even affection was rationed. When I caught the flu at 15, Carolyn left orange juice and crackers by the door, but never checked on me. Frank slipped me a paperback novel once, leaving it on my nightstand without a word. I remember clutching that book like it was a message from another world. "You exist." I noticed you. The truth is, I mistook neglect for normalcy. I told myself every family had their quirks, that maybe love wasn't hugs and laughter, but punctual bills and efficient meals. I didn't realize until my 18th birthday, until the trash bag, that I had never been a son at all. I was a financial project, an 18-year investment designed to pay the mortgage. And yet buried in those years of ledger books and silence, I learned something neither Carolyn nor Frank ever intended to teach me. I learned to recognize the absence of love, to notice how it stings, how it leaves rooms colder and dinners quieter than they should be. I learned that numbers can keep you fed, but they cannot keep you whole. As I stood there on the porch, my belongings in a bag, their voices fading behind me, I finally understood the cruel arithmetic of my childhood. I had been worth exactly $1,500 a month, no more, no less. And with the clock striking my 18th year, the account had closed. When the door shut behind me that day, it wasn't just wood meeting its frame. It was 18 years of pretending slamming closed. I walked down the porch steps, clutching that black bag, my wallet holding less than $60, my future weighing even less. Mrs. Ruth, who had watched me grow up from her front porch across the street, called out in disbelief. She hurried over, her thin hands trembling as she reached for mine. "Carolyn, Frank, you can't do this to him. He's still a boy." Carolyn's voice snapped back, sharp as broken glass. "He's 18. The contract's over." That word contract burned hotter than the Texas sun. Ruth shook her head, her white curls catching the light like a halo. But her pleas met only Carolyn's steely silence. Frank lingered in the doorway, hands buried in his pockets, eyes glued to the ground. He never spoke. Not one word. So I walked. Past trimmed lawns, past barking dogs behind chain-link fences, past the only home I had ever known, though it had never been mine. By dusk, the bag's plastic handles had cut raw lines into my palms. I ended up downtown where the neon signs flickered against cracked sidewalks, and the smell of fried food mixed with exhaust. The Dallas Public Library loomed like a fortress of glass and stone. Its steps were wide, and by the time night fell, I wasn't the only one lying there. That first night, the concrete felt colder than I imagined, harder than the floors I'd mopped every Saturday back in the Harris house. I curled around my bag as if it could shield me. Every sound, a car horn, footsteps, laughter echoing from a bar made me flinch. Sleep came in fragments, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of roast dinners and quiet Sunday afternoons that I realized had never really been mine either. Hunger set in after 2 days. My wallet had shrunk to a few crumpled bills, and I rationed them with the precision I had inherited from Carolyn's lessons in scarcity. 1 sandwich here, 1 bottle of water there. By the 3rd morning, I found myself standing in line at a church basement. Volunteers ladled soup into styrofoam bowls, their smiles tired but kind. I ate slowly, pretending it was enough, pretending it filled more than just my stomach. It was there outside the church that I met Jake. He couldn't have been more than 20, though the streets had carved shadows under his eyes that made him look older. He noticed me fumbling with the straps of my bag, my movements stiff with inexperience. "First week," he asked, handing me a half-smoked cigarette. I didn't take. I nodded, my voice caught before I could form words. Jake grinned, not unkindly. "You'll learn. There's rules out here. Don't sleep under bridges alone. Don't trust guys offering too much. Keep your shoes on even when you're tired. And always keep an eye out for the cops, they'll move you along." He became my reluctant guide. He showed me how to wash clothes in public bathroom sinks, how to stash food where rats couldn't reach, how to spot which dumpsters behind restaurants offered bread that was only a day old. He called it street wisdom, passing it down like it was family tradition, though I knew he had no family left to claim him. Sometimes at night, lying side by side on the library steps, we'd trade scraps of our past. Jake had been in foster homes too, shuffled around until he aged out just like me. "They cash the checks, then they cash you out," he said once, his laugh brittle. Hearing it from someone else made the truth sting less, or maybe more. Days blurred into weeks. I learned how to look busy enough during the day so security guards didn't chase me off, how to stand tall enough that people passing by wouldn't see me as prey. But every evening, when the city quieted and the library lights dimmed, the loneliness wrapped itself around me tighter than the thin blanket Jake had found at a shelter. I was 18, already discarded learning survival in the cracks of a city that barely noticed. And yet deep down, a whisper kept rising above the hunger and fear. Surely somewhere, someone had once wanted me. That whisper was the only thing that kept me moving. The whisper that someone somewhere must have wanted me stayed with me during those long nights outside the library. It was more stubborn than hunger, more persistent than the ache in my bones. And one hot afternoon in late June, that whisper took human form. I was sitting on the library steps, knees pulled to my chest, watching the world move by at a speed I no longer belonged to. Jake had gone off to check a church pantry, and I was alone when I noticed a man in a gray suit moving through the crowd. He didn't walk like the rest, hurried, distracted eyes on the ground. He walked with purpose, scanning faces, each step deliberate. When his eyes landed on me, I knew before he said a word he was looking for me. My instinct was to get up and run the way street kids do when authority gets too close. But something in the way he slowed, almost cautious, kept me rooted. "Daniel Harris?" he asked, pulling a leather wallet from his jacket. Inside was a badge, not police, but official enough to make my heart race. "Depends who's asking." I managed my voice rasping from too many nights of silence. He knelt slightly, so we were eye level. His suit was clean pressed, but he didn't seem to care that the concrete was dirty. That small gesture, a man in polished shoes not afraid to touch the ground I slept on, told me more than his badge. "My name is Richard Cole. I'm a private investigator. I've been searching for you for 3 months. He held out a card, thick with embossed lettering, the kind I'd only ever seen in TV shows. I stared at it, unable to take it. Why? He studied me for a moment before speaking. Because someone hired me to find you. Someone who wanted to meet you the day you turned 18. Your biological father. The words struck like a blow I hadn't braced for. Biological father. For years, that phrase had been locked behind Carolyn's cold stare and Frank's silence. Now it was standing in front of me in a gray suit with my name on his lips. I laughed, sharp and bitter. You're too late. That birthday came and went with a garbage bag. Richard's expression softened, and in that softness I saw the shadow of what he was about to tell me. I'm sorry, Daniel. Edward Brennan. Your father passed away 2 days before your birthday. Heart attack at his desk. The world tilted. I gripped the step beneath me, the stone suddenly unsteady. The name meant nothing to me at first, just syllables in the air. But Richard went on, filling the silence with truths I hadn't asked for. He was the founder of Brennan Oil, built an empire from one rig, one of the wealthiest men in Texas. But none of that mattered to him more than finding you. He spent 18 years looking. 18 years. The same number I had lived with Carolyn's ledgers and Frank's silence. While they counted checks, someone else had been counting days. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand why fate had handed me this cruel symmetry, loved from a distance, but abandoned up close. Instead, I sat there mute, watching Richard's lips move, hearing words I couldn't absorb. He hired me years ago, Richard continued. I finally got a lead when your social security number came up in a job application. He was planning to meet you on your birthday. He even had a dinner reservation, a cake ordered. But his heart gave out before he could get to you. I pressed my palms to my face, not to cry, but to block out the picture forming a man at a desk, clutching paperwork, waiting for the day his son would finally be his again, only to collapse before it came. Richard didn't fill the silence this time. He simply waited as if he knew the weight of what he'd placed on me. Finally, I lowered my hands. He wanted me. Richard nodded. More than anything. And though he's gone, there are things he left behind for you. Letters, records, and something more. The whisper inside me was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar. Someone had wanted me, desperately. And the cruel twist was that I was finding out only when it was too late to meet him. Richard didn't leave me with only a name. A few days after our first meeting, he asked me to come with him to a quiet diner near the bus station. I was still wearing the same second-hand jeans and the same scuffed sneakers, but he treated me like a guest of honor. When the coffee arrived, he slid a worn photograph across the table. It was a younger man, maybe 22, holding a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. His hair was darker than mine, his jawline sharper, but the resemblance was undeniable. The baby's eyes, my eyes, looked straight at the camera, unknowing, unguarded. "That's Edward Brennan," Richard said softly. "And that's you, just hours old." My throat tightened. I'd never seen myself as an infant. Carolyn had no baby pictures of me, no albums tucked in closets. For the first time, I saw proof that I had been cradled by someone who looked at me with something more than obligation. Edward's expression wasn't casual. It was fierce, protective, the look of a man already in love. Richard reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a folder thick with documents. He never stopped trying, Daniel. He spent millions, lawyers, investigators, lobbyists, trying to break through sealed records. Every trail led to dead ends, but he refused to stop. I thumbed through the pages, legal filings stamped with rejection notices, invoices from private investigators, handwritten notes in margins. Edward had been chasing a shadow of me for 18 years. My chest ached at the thought while I had been mowing lawns for pocket money he had been burning through fortunes to find me. But the folder held darker truths, too. Letters from Carolyn and Frank's lawyers threatening restraining orders if Edward persisted. One written in Carolyn's clipped tone declared any contact from Mr. Brennan would disrupt our family unit. Daniel is thriving. His interference is neither welcome nor necessary. Thriving. I nearly laughed. Thriving on rationed meals with ledger books documenting my worth. Thriving without hugs, without warmth, without even a family photograph to my name. Richard's hand rested gently on the folder. They knew Daniel. They knew he wanted you. They kept him away to keep the checks coming. The rage that rose in me was cold, not fiery. It was the kind of anger that settles deep in the bones, heavy and silent. For years I had begged Carolyn for just a hint of affection. All the while she had been hiding the truth that someone out there had been desperate to give it to me. Richard wasn't finished. From another envelope he drew out a letter yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. The handwriting was elegant, looping in a way I recognized from an earlier time. "It's from your grandmother," he explained. "Edward's mother. She wrote this after your adoption. She wanted to fight it, but Edward was young, grieving, overwhelmed. His parents convinced him it was best to let you go. She carried guilt for years." I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. "My dear Daniel," it began, "I begged them not to sign those papers. You were the last piece of Emily your mother and I could not bear to let you go, but I was silenced. I pray you forgive us one day. Know this, you were loved before you even took your first breath." Tears blurred the ink. All my life I had believed I was a mistake, a burden shuffled into a beige house for profit. Now here was proof that I had been wanted, fought for, loved, even if that love had been locked away in silence. Richard watched me fold the letter carefully, as though it might crumble if I breathed too hard. "There's more," he said. "Your father left behind records, gifts, and a message. You'll see soon." I leaned back, the diner noise buzzing faintly around us. For the first time, the balance shifted. Carolyn's cold words, Frank's silence, 18 years of ledger entries, they no longer defined me. There had always been another story running parallel to mine, hidden in vaults and courtrooms in photographs and letters that never reached me. And now, piece by piece, I was beginning to uncover it. The photograph of my father holding me the letter from my grandmother, they were enough to crack open the story I thought I knew. But it wasn't until Richard led me through the glass doors of a law office on the 40th floor that the full weight of it came crashing down. The receptionist guided us into a conference room where the Dallas skyline stretched in every direction. Sitting at the head of the table was a woman in her 50s, her navy suit crisp, her glasses perched low on her nose. She rose as we entered. "Mr. Harris," she said, extending a hand. "My name is Margaret Chen. I was your father's attorney. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss." The words "your father" landed heavy foreign, but not unwelcome. I sat my palms slick against the polished wood. Margaret placed a sealed envelope on the table. My name, Daniel, was written across it in a hurried script. "This was written by Edward the morning he passed," she explained. "He insisted you receive it, unopened by your own hands." I tore it open carefully. Inside were 3 pages filled with restless handwriting and a small brass key with an address tag. My father's voice reached me across time and silence. My son, if you're reading this, then I failed to find you in time. But I never stopped trying. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you. Your mother died bringing you into this world, and in my weakness I let others convince me to give you away. It was the worst mistake of my life. I built an empire not for the money, but as a beacon hoping it might one day shine bright enough for you to find me. I have loved you since the moment I lost you. You are everything. My vision blurred. The letter went on telling me about gifts he had bought but never given, letters he had written but never sent. The key, he explained, opened a vault. Inside was the proof of his love. When I looked up, Margaret slid another folder across the table. Numbers filled its pages, assets, deeds, account balances. My father's empire. Brennan Oil, valued at $91 million. 4 estates across Texas, a private island off the Gulf Coast he had named Daniel's Haven. Investments, stocks, and trust funds. It's all yours, Margaret said gently. Every penny, every property, every responsibility. He wanted no one else to have it. I leaned back, air caught in my lungs. For 18 years I had been treated as a liability. Now, with a single envelope, I was told I was heir to a fortune that could alter the course of my life forever. But the money wasn't what broke me. It was what came next. Richard drove me to the vault, a nondescript warehouse in Houston with layers of security. Inside was a room that stopped me cold. Along the walls, stacked neatly, were hundreds of boxes and envelopes. Birthday gifts for every year. A toy fire truck for when I was 4. A baseball glove for when I was 9. Keys to a car. I had never driven a 1969 Mustang polished and waiting under a tarp. In the center stood a desk. On it, organized by year, were letters. Each one began the same way. My son. Some were short, written in exhaustion, others long and brimming with details of a life I never shared. He wrote about board meetings where he carried my school photo in his briefcase, about oil fields named after me, about the empty seat at his table year after year. And then Richard handed me a tablet. There's one more thing. The screen flickered to life. My father's face appeared older, weary, but determined. His voice filled the silent room. Daniel, if you're watching this, it means I couldn't make it. But listen closely. You are not a mistake. You are not an obligation. You are my son. You are everything. I love you, and I always have. I only wish I could have told you in person. The video ended, and for a long moment all I could hear was my own heartbeat echoing in that vault. Surrounded by unopened presents, by letters spanning 18 years, I realized that love had been searching for me all along, and though my father's body had failed him, his love had not. I left the vault with shaking hands and a heart too heavy to carry. The letters, the gifts, the final video, those were the inheritance that mattered most. The millions, the properties, the island, they were just tools. But they were tools I could use to rewrite a story that had begun with abandonment. Richard stayed close in those first uncertain weeks. He became more than an investigator. He was a mentor, a steady voice guiding me through boardrooms and contracts I barely understood. The men and women who had served my father for decades treated me with a cautious respect. At 19, I was suddenly CEO of Brennan Oil, though most days I still felt like the boy huddled on library steps. The transition was jarring. One morning I was washing shirts in a public sink, the next, I was standing in a conference room overlooking Dallas, being asked to approve investments that carried more zeros than I could count. But whenever doubt clawed at me, I remembered my father's words. I built this for you. And slowly, I found my footing. The mansions felt too big, too empty. I couldn't bear to walk through their echoing hallways, knowing they were meant for a life I never lived. So, I began converting them. One by one, those polished estates became shelters for kids aging out of foster care, for teenagers with nowhere to go once the system closed its doors. I walked through each room with architects and social workers, pointing to spaces where bunk beds would stand, where kitchens would finally hold warm meals, where laughter could replace silence. I named the project the Brennan Foundation, not after myself, but after the man who had spent 18 years searching for me. The funds poured into programs I knew too well, tutoring for kids who had been invisible in classrooms, counseling for those carrying scars too deep for words, housing for the ones who had slept in cars, and libraries like I once had. Jake was one of the first I brought in. I found him back at the library steps, the same spot where Richard had found me. His eyes widened when he saw me step out of a black sedan in a tailored suit. "You clean up nice," he smirked, though his voice carried disbelief. I told him about the inheritance, the letters, the foundation. He shook his head. "That doesn't happen to guys like us." "It does now," I said. "Come with me. Help me run this. You know these streets better than anyone." He resisted at first, convinced it was charity. But I reminded him how he'd taught me the unspoken rules of survival, how he'd given me wisdom when I had nothing. Eventually, he agreed. Today, Jake manages one of the homes, making sure no kid under his watch ever has to ration food or wash clothes in a sink the way we did. Some nights I sit in my father's old study, his glasses still resting on the desk, and I think about the strange symmetry of it all. 18 years of being treated like a paycheck, followed by the revelation that I had been the heartbeat of a man's empire. I carry both truths inside me. They don't cancel each other out. They coexist, shaping me into someone who knows the cost of neglect and the power of love. The money gave me freedom, yes. But the real gift was responsibility, the chance to turn my father's relentless search into a lifeline for others, still waiting to be found. The more the foundation grew, the more I realized that healing wasn't only about creating new beginnings. Sometimes it also meant facing the ghosts of the past. For me, those ghosts lived in a cramped apartment on the far side of Dallas, behind rusted railings and a broken security gate. I hadn't seen Carolyn and Frank since the day they shut the door on me. But word travels quickly in small towns, and when the news of my inheritance reached them, it didn't take long before a letter arrived at the foundation office. It wasn't an apology. It was a request. They needed help with rent, with bills, with life, now that the safety net of subsidies was gone. Against every instinct, I agreed to see them. Not because I owed them, but because I needed to look them in the eyes one last time. The apartment smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper peeling at the corners. Carolyn opened the door. She looked older. The sharp edges of her face softened not by kindness, but by exhaustion. Frank stood behind her, stooped, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. Daniel Carolyn began, her voice almost sweet, though I knew better. "We raised you for 18 years. We gave you food, shelter, schooling. Surely you can see your way to helping us now." Her words struck like a script she had rehearsed, the same language of obligation transaction exchange. I took a slow breath. "You didn't raise me for free. The state paid you every month, every year. By my calculation, you were paid in full. What you never gave me, and what money can't buy, was love." For the first time, Carolyn had no numbers to argue, no calculator to hide behind. Her lips tightened, Her eyes flickered with something like regret, or maybe just anger that her accounting no longer worked on me. Frank tried to speak, his voice low. "Son." But the word fell flat. It wasn't his to use anymore. I left them standing in the dim hallway, their world crumbling, as mine was finally beginning to take shape. Walking out of that building, I felt no triumph, only release. A door that had once slammed shut, now closed quietly forever. Weeks later, I traveled to the island my father had bought years ago. The locals called it Brennan's Haven, but carved into the wooden dock was a different name, Daniel's Haven. I sat there as the sun melted into the gulf, the letter my father had written resting in my hands. "Welcome home, son," it read. His handwriting wavered near the end, but the words were steady enough to carry me across the years. I whispered them aloud, letting the waves echo back. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mrs. Ruth, leaning on her cane, had come to visit. Her eyes were damp, but shining. "I never told you this," she said, settling beside me. "I knew your father. Edward came to me once, years ago, asking if I'd seen a boy who looked like him. I recognized the resemblance, but Carolyn warned me to stay quiet. I've carried that secret ever since." I turned to her, stunned. Ruth, the one neighbor who had always shown me kindness, had been holding a piece of my father all along. "He wanted you more than anything," she continued. "And now that you've found him even in this way, I can tell you stories of the young man. He was stubborn, hopeful, and full of love. Stories you deserve to hear." The circle closed that evening, from abandonment to inheritance, from silence to truth, from being unwanted to being deeply known. As the tide rose around Daniel's Haven, I felt the weight of both loss and love entwined, but not canceling each other out. For the first time, I was truly home.